In the sweltering heat of Vietnam's jungles, where sunlight dared only to slip through dense canopies like feeble rays begging to survive, a terrifying secret lurked beneath the black earth. It was 1966, the height of the Vietnam War, or as the locals called it, the American War, a time of unrelenting brutality. Beneath rickety bamboo huts, amidst endless stretches of rice paddies, the Viet Cong had woven a labyrinth of tunnels, an underground network sprawling tens of thousands of miles, where they survived, fought, and vanished like phantoms in a nightmare. These tunnels were not just a strategic marvel, but a chilling underworld of absolute darkness, deadly traps, and wordless mysteries awaiting any intruder. Imagine yourself as a 19-year-old American soldier, fresh from a high school classroom in Nebraska or Ohio, now standing in an alien jungle, clutching an M16 still smelling of machine oil. Sweat streams down your forehead, soaking your uniform in the 110-degree Fahrenheit heat, where the air is thick as a bowl of soup forgotten on the stove. Your lieutenant, with his familiar gravelly voice worn from sleepless nights, points to a tiny hole in the ground, no bigger than a manhole cover. "Check it," he orders, his tone as casual as if he's asking you to grab another MRE, the ones your squad jokes are worse than a McDonald's burger left in the car. You peer into the pitch-black hole, just wide enough for one person to squeeze through. No flashlight, no night vision goggles. Only the damp smell of earth rising, mingled with something rotten, as if the jungle itself is exhaling the breath of death. Do you dare step inside? This story isn't just about battles fought on the surface, where gunfire and explosions resound like a symphony of chaos. It's the journey of America's tunnel rats, small-statured, gutsy soldiers who dared to crawl into the earth to face the Viet Cong and things far more terrifying. They didn't just fight an enemy, but darkness, fear, and mysteries they carried back from the underworld. Stories that made even the most seasoned soldiers shudder when retold around campfires. Brace yourself, because this tale isn't only about gunpowder and blood, but about things that'll make you double-check your door before bed. Beneath the earth, time seems to stand still. The Viet Cong's tunnels were a testament to patience and desperation, dug from the 1940s when the Vietnamese began their fight for independence against French colonials, then the Japanese, and finally the Allied forces. With each shovel strike, each tin bowl scooping dirt, they transformed peaceful villages into underground fortresses where warriors and civilians alike could hide from brutal raids. By 1966, this network had become a city beneath the soil, with meeting rooms, makeshift hospitals, and weapons caches buried deep. Entrances were cunningly disguised, a trapdoor under a cooking pot, a small hole in a pigsty, or even a passage beneath a river where soft earth blended with muddy sludge. Ventilation holes, tiny as termite mounds, were hidden under bushes, releasing the sharp scent of pepper to fool American tracking dogs. These tunnels were more than shelters. They were battlegrounds, homes, and sometimes tombs. The Viet Cong lived in them for months, giving birth, treating illnesses, and planning attacks, all in suffocating darkness where the air was so heavy that each breath was a struggle. But what made these tunnels truly terrifying wasn't just the warriors hiding with knives and guns, but the sense that Vietnam's Mother Earth was alive, watching. The first American soldiers to enter, armed with courage laced with naivety, could never have imagined they were facing not only the Viet Cong, but mysteries beyond their comprehension. Picture yourself as one of those tunnel rats, chosen for your slight frame, small enough to navigate passages as narrow as coffins. You're trained to fight in darkness, relying on hearing and smell, when a flashlight could be an invitation to death. Each step is a gamble, where the earthen floor might collapse, revealing a pit of sharpened bamboo stakes or a starving viper ready to strike your face. The stench of decaying bodies, damp soil, and something inexplicable clings to every breath. And then, in a moment of deadly silence, you hear a sound, not human but like claws scraping earth, or a whisper from the dark. Is it the Viet Cong or something else? Something even the toughest warriors dare not name. The story of these tunnels is not just history, but a descent into the minds of soldiers, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Those who survived brought back not only scars on their bodies, but memories of glowing red eyes in the dark, of shadows moving soundlessly, of being watched by something not of this world. They shared these tales in American bars, over cold beers, their voices trembling as if afraid the darkness still lurked nearby. This is the prelude to a story not just of war, but of courage, fear, and mysteries buried deep underground. The tunnel rats faced the darkness, but did they truly escape? Or did a part of them remain trapped forever in those tunnels where light never reaches? Get ready, because as you step into this story, you won't just hear about gunfire and war, but about things that make you wonder, is something waiting in the darkness right beneath our feet? The Vietnam War was a prolonged nightmare, a quagmire of blood, gunpowder, and shattered dreams, where millions of innocent people were caught between the battle lines of ideology and violence. It all began in the mid-19th century, when French colonizers, under the iron grip of Napoleon III, set foot on Indochina, transforming peaceful rice villages into battlegrounds for colonial ambition. Vietnam, with its dense jungles and quiet rivers, became prey to foreign powers, from the French to the Japanese during World War II, when the Emperor's army swooped in to plunder resources and oppress the people. When Japan surrendered in 1945, freedom seemed within reach, but Vietnam was torn apart by political machinations. The North fell to the Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, a man burning with the dream of independence, inspired by Lenin's communist rhetoric. Meanwhile, the South was shackled by a French-backed regime, propped up by dollars from Washington. The war was not just about gunfire. It was a brutal chess game, with the Vietnamese people as unwilling pawns, torn between dreams of freedom and the reality of bombs and bullets. In the South, the guerrilla force known as the Viet Cong, or Victor Charlie, as American soldiers called them with a mix of disdain and fear, rose like phantoms in the jungle. They had no roaring tanks or B-52s dropping bombs from the skies like the Allied forces, but they wielded a more terrifying weapon, cold patience and a network of tunnels buried deep beneath the earth, where they could live, fight, and vanish as if swallowed by the motherland herself. From the 1940s, when the resistance against the French was still in its infancy, Vietnamese villagers began digging secret passages under their bamboo hamlets, through rice paddies, and even right under the noses of American bases. Fortresses the GIs jokingly called Fort Bragg of Vietnam, though no one dared bring hamburgers or Budweiser here. By 1965, these tunnels had evolved into an underground marvel, a city beneath the earth with secret meeting rooms, rudimentary hospitals where babies were born by candlelight, and arsenals stocked with old rifles and homemade grenades. Each tunnel entrance was a masterpiece of camouflage, designed to fool both man and machine. A trapdoor might hide beneath a cooking pot in a kitchen, where the smell of roasted rice masked the damp earth. Another passage could lie under a pile of pig manure in a sty, a place no American soldier dared sniff. though they'd joke it was still better than MRE beef stew. Ventilation holes, small as termite mounds, were concealed under bushes or tree roots, releasing the sharp scent of pepper to thwart Allied tracking dogs. The tunnel diggers, with calloused hands and crude shovels, turned the earth into an ally, a safe haven from airstrikes and brutal sweeps. But beneath the serene facade of these villages, another world thrived, a world of darkness, survival, and mysteries that made even the boldest warriors shudder. Jake Miller, a 25-year-old sergeant from Ohio, was one of the first American soldiers to encounter this secret. With sun-bleached blonde hair and a sly grin, Jake was the kind of guy who always carried a pack of gum in his pocket, ready to crack a joke to chase away fear. He'd regale his buddies with stories of watching Star Trek at his hometown theater, but in Vietnam's jungles, no starship could save him from reality. One stifling afternoon, as his exhausted platoon trudged through the forest, Jake sensed something amiss. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble slightly, as if something were moving below. "It's like walking into hell," he muttered to his squad, chewing gum from an MRE pack. The stuff he'd joke was worse than the time my mom tried making tacos. But Jake didn't know that beneath the earth he stood on, there weren't just Viet Cong with AK-47 and iron resolve, but other mysteries, things that left his entire team exchanging uneasy glances. The war above ground was brutal enough, with sudden ambushes and dense jungles where every bush could hide a sniper. But underground, the war took on a different hue, a cat-and-mouse game in the dark, where the enemy wasn't just human, but the suffocating environment itself. The tunnels were more than shelters. They were battlegrounds, where every turn could lead to a deadly trap. A pit of sharpened bamboo stakes, a viper tied to the ceiling, or a booby-trapped box of scorpions ready to make its victims scream in agony. American soldiers, armed with M16s and the cocky confidence of boys raised on football and John Wayne movies, initially thought they could easily flush out the Viet Cong. But they soon learned that in these tunnels, technology and firepower weren't everything. Underground, patience and fear were the forces that decided fate. Jake and his platoon, part of the 1st Infantry Division, were trained to handle any situation, from major battles to tense jungle patrols. But nothing prepared them for the tunnels. When Jake first saw an entrance, hidden under a layer of dry leaves like a dare from the darkness, a chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just the Viet Cong, but something deeper, a sense that Vietnam's Mother Earth was alive, watching and unwelcoming to intruders. Stories circulated among the troops, of shadows moving silently, of whispers in the night creeping into Jake's mind. He tried to brush them off with jokes about Vietnam Bigfoot or jungle monsters. But deep down, he knew these tunnels were more than battlegrounds. They were repositories of secrets no one dared probe too deeply. On March 15, 1966, the feeble sunlight pierced through the dense jungle canopy near a rubber plantation 25 miles from Saigon, where the humid heat clung to every breath. Jake Miller's platoon, part of the 1st Infantry Division, trudged through muddy trails, their boots caked with red earth. They had just endured a ruthless ambush. The Viet Cong, like phantoms, had sniped from the underbrush, claiming 2 American lives before melting into the jungle. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, mingling with sweat and the fear etched deep on the young soldiers' faces. Jake, the 25-year-old sergeant from Ohio, gripped his M16 tightly, his sharp eyes scanning every bush. But deep down, he knew. The enemy had vanished, as if Vietnam's Mother Earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. The platoon halted in a clearing where rubber trees stood silent like stoic sentinels. Exhausted, Mike Thompson, a lanky rookie from Texas with a thick southern drawl, collapsed onto the ground, his heavy pack weighing on his shoulders. Suddenly he yelped, leaping up as if shocked. A rusty nail protruding from a small wooden trapdoor hidden under dry leaves had pierced him. The team snapped to attention, rifles aimed in all directions, hearts pounding. Jake, whose curiosity once kept him glued to the Twilight Zone episodes back home, stepped forward, signaling his squad to stand back. He knelt, carefully brushing away the leaves, revealing a small wooden panel, no bigger than a manhole cover, coated in dirt and moss. A cold draft rose from the gap, carrying the smell of damp earth, decay, and something like dried blood, twisting his stomach into knots. Jake's flashlight beam cut downward, but its weak glow only made the darkness below more menacing. The black hole, narrow enough for just one person, gaped like a waiting mouth. Sarah Evans, the platoon's medic with her hair tied back and bright eyes, stood nearby, trying to stay calm. She whispered, with a hint of humor to ease the tension, that the hole looked like a set from The Thing, the horror flick the squad had debated over while sharing dry MRE turkey. But her smile faded as the stench surged stronger, as if something lurked below. Biding its time, Jake, with his slight build and agility honed from high school football, volunteered to go down. He checked his .45 pistol, bayonet gleaming at his side, and took a deep breath, trying to banish images of Hollywood monsters. His squad stood above, silent, their anxious eyes tracking his figure as it vanished into the dark. As Jake crawled in, the space clamped around him. The damp, earthen walls grazed his shoulders, cold as invisible fingers. The tunnel, narrow as a coffin, squeezed his chest, making every breath a struggle. His breathing echoed, blending with a steady drip somewhere in the darkness, maybe water or something far worse. With each meter he crawled, the sense of isolation grew suffocating, as if the world above had ceased to exist, leaving only him and the dark. Jake's flashlight, his sole defense against being swallowed by fear, began to flicker. The beam stuttered, then died completely, plunging him into absolute blackness. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. His heart pounded, the rush of blood in his ears drowning out all else. He tried to stay calm, telling himself it was just a technical glitch, that the army never issued decent gear. Like radios dying mid-battle, he'd joke with his squad. But then a sound froze him. Not human, not gunfire, but a sharp scraping, like claws sliding across wet earth. It came from ahead, deep in the tunnel, where light had never reached. Jake gripped his pistol, his finger trembling on the trigger, trying to convince himself it was just rats. Giant rats, the kind American soldiers said grew as big as puppies, thriving in the dark. But his heart, like a soldier sounding an alarm, thumped wildly, warning that whatever waited wasn't so simple. He crawled on slowly, each movement a battle against fear. The tunnel twisted and turned like a serpent, its jagged walls scraping his skin. The stench grew thicker, no longer just earth and blood, but laced with something like sulfur, as if he were inching toward a place not meant for humans. Suddenly he felt a cold draft, not from the earth but from ahead, as if something had just passed by. In the darkness his eyes strained, desperate to catch any shape, but there was only void. Then, for a fleeting moment, he saw it, a fiery red glow like the eyes of a beast flashing before vanishing. It was too quick, too vague, making Jake wonder if he was losing his mind, like the stories of soldiers unhinged by Agent Orange. But deep down, He knew it wasn't a hallucination. Something was here, not Viet Cong, but another entity watching him from the dark. Jake halted, his breath ragged, his hand clutching the pistol until his knuckles whitened. He thought of nights back home, gathered with friends around a campfire, swapping tales of Bigfoot or forest demons. Those stories had been laughs, but now, in this alien underworld, they became a terrifying reality. He wanted to turn back, to climb to the surface where Light and his squad awaited. But courage, forged through training at Fort Benning, through battles in rice paddies, held him there. He was a tunnel rat, and his mission was to face the darkness, whatever it held. Above ground, Jake's platoon stood frozen, eyes locked on the trap door. They heard the faint scraping from below, weak, but enough to make Sarah grip her medkit tightly and Mike mutter a rare prayer. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. Jake wasn't just facing the Viet Cong, but something deeper, something Vietnam's jungles had kept hidden for centuries. And as the darkness swallowed him, they could only wait, hoping their comrade would return, and that he wouldn't bring something back from the underworld. Beneath the earth where light never reached, the Viet Cong's tunnels were a marvel of perseverance and horror. Dug over 2 decades with small shovels and crude tin bowls, they stretched from Saigon to the DMZ, over 400 miles north, like a network of veins hidden within the body of Mother Earth. Some plunged 30 feet deep, with 4 stacked levels, housing makeshift hospitals where babies were born by flickering candlelight, and even underground theaters where fighters found fleeting solace on the edge of life and death. But what made American soldiers, brimming with youthful confidence and superior firepower, tremble wasn't just the Viet Cong's presence. It was the deadly traps crafted with the ruthlessness of minds that knew fear could kill a soldier before a blade ever did. Each tunnel was a labyrinth of peril. Hidden pits, covered by thin layers of earth, bristled with sharpened bamboo stakes, coated in animal feces, ready to pierce a foot and leave festering wounds in the jungle's humid heat. Starving vipers, tied to ceilings, waited to strike an intruder's face, their venom turning victims into writhing masses of pain before death. Worse still were booby-trapped boxes of scorpions and fire ants, designed not just to kill, but to torment, forcing screams that echoed through narrow passages as a warning to those who dared follow. American soldiers, raised on afternoons of football and McDonald's hamburgers, were unprepared for a war where the enemy wasn't just human, but the darkness itself. Jake Miller, the 25-year-old sergeant with a slight build and keen eyes, crawled through a twisting tunnel where every turn could be his last. The cramped space pressed against his chest, the damp, earthen walls scraping his shoulders like icy fingers. His .45 pistol felt heavy in his hand, the bayonet at his side gleaming in the faint glow of his flickering flashlight. With each meter he advanced, the sense of isolation grew suffocating, as if the world above, with his squad, sunlight, and jungle birds, had vanished. Only he remained, alone with the darkness and the thundering of his heartbeat, like a clock counting down. Suddenly he sensed a presence, not human, but like a shadow flitting past, so swift he wasn't sure it was real. The earthen floor trembled faintly beneath his hands, and a thick stench surged, not like the corpses he'd smelled in surface battles, but akin to wild beasts, or something older. Roused from the earth's depths, Jake froze, his breath ragged, his hand gripping the pistol tightly. In the darkness, fiery red eyes flashed like twin embers, then vanished, leaving him questioning whether it was a hallucination from oxygen deprivation or stress. He recalled stories told around campfires as his squad chewed MREs and joked about Vietnam Bigfoot or jungle spirits, entities American soldiers dismissed as Hollywood horror fodder. "Just my imagination," Jake muttered, trying to banish fear with memories of Ohio nights watching the creature from the Black Lagoon with friends. But deep down, he knew what he'd seen wasn't a trick of the mind. Something was stalking, and it didn't bear the form of a Viet Cong fighter. His moment to think was shattered by a deafening blast behind him. A grenade trap triggered by a Viet Cong hidden somewhere in the maze shook the tunnel. Dirt and dust rained down, clinging to Jake's hair and face, choking him as he coughed violently. With no way back, he crawled faster, heart pounding chaotically, each movement a struggle against the tight space and mounting fear. Suddenly, his shoulder brushed a dirt wall, but it wasn't solid like the others. It gave slightly like a false door. With utmost caution, Jake pushed it open, and instantly a cold hand seized his throat from the darkness. Gaunt fingers, strong as steel, tightened, yanking him into a hidden alcove. In the dim light, Jake saw a Viet Cong fighter, eyes blazing with resolve, a knife pressed to his throat, glinting like a promise of death. In that moment, time slowed. Jake struggled, his body reacting with instincts honed at Fort Benning. He twisted, slamming his elbow into his attacker, and fired 3 shots from his pistol. The blasts echoed, piercing his eardrums like church bells. The enemy collapsed, body limp, blood pooling on the earthen floor. But as Jake shone his flashlight on the corpse, he froze. The blood gave off a strange odor, not human, but laced with sulfur, as if what he'd killed wasn't entirely of this world. He recoiled, breath heaving, eyes scanning the darkness, half expecting those red eyes to reappear, but only silence, heavy and terrifying, enveloped him. Jake slumped against the dirt wall, struggling to regain composure. The tunnel, with its traps and mysteries, wasn't just a battlefield, but another realm, where the line between human and supernatural blurred. He thought of his squad above ground, of Sarah's reassuring smile, of Mike's dumb jokes about the Air Force camping at the Hilton. But in his heart, a question lingered. What lived in these tunnels, and could he truly escape, or had the darkness already claimed a part of him? As he crawled onward, carrying the memory of those red eyes and the sulphurous stench, Jake knew this war wasn't just against the Viet Cong, but against the fear growing in his heart. Beneath Vietnam's dense jungles, where darkness reigned both above and below the earth, Jake Miller was not the only one to face the nightmare of the Viet Cong's tunnels. When the Allies realized that superior firepower and airstrikes couldn't root out enemies hidden underground, they were forced to adapt. To defeat the Viet Cong, they needed soldiers willing to crawl into the earth where every step was a gamble with death. Thus, the tunnel rats were born. Small-statured, gritty soldiers like Jake, Mike Thompson, or Tom Reed from Georgia, chosen not just for their compact frames, but for a courage bordering on madness. Armed with a .45 pistol, a gleaming bayonet, and the brash pride of American boys raised on football and John Wayne films, they ventured into the darkness, carrying a mix of hope and fear. Tunnel exploration was a wordless nightmare. The cramped spaces, too narrow to turn around, pressed against the chest like a living coffin. The damp, icy walls scraped skin, leaving a sensation of being buried alive. Flashlights, the only light in absolute darkness, often flickered out, abandoning soldiers in a void where senses were devoured. The tunnel rats learned to rely on hearing and smell, detecting faint vibrations in the earth to spot booby traps or catching the rusty tang of a waiting blade. But no training at Fort Benning, no tactical lesson could prepare them for what lurked in the dark. Each mission was a deadly game, as Tom Reed once said, chewing gum from an MRE pack, calling it playing Russian roulette, but every chamber's loaded. Tom, with his curly hair and devil-may-care grin, was one of the platoon's gutsiest tunnel rats. But even he couldn't shake the memory of crawling through a flooded tunnel where darkness and pressure nearly drove him mad. Holding his breath for 2 minutes, lungs burning, hands clawing at muddy walls, he faced a Viet Cong fighter waiting with a spear glinting like an invitation to death. Tom survived, but the spear left a long scar across his chest and a haunting memory. During the struggle, he glimpsed a tall figure, not Viet Cong, standing motionless behind his foe, watching. The shape had no face, just a massive black form radiating a chill that froze his blood. He never shared the details, only shaking his head when pressed, but his eyes said it all. Something dwelled underground, and it wasn't of this world. Stories like these spread through the ranks, whispered around campfires where soldiers shared MREs and tried to joke away their fear. Some dismissed them as hallucinations, products of stress, oxygen deprivation, or Agent Orange clouding the mind. But others, those who'd crawled through the tunnels and felt the cold breath of darkness, believed in something more sinister. They spoke of jungle spirits, supernatural entities guarding the Viet Cong, or Mother Vietnam herself, an ancient force rising to punish invaders. True or imagined, these tales took root, making even the toughest soldiers double-check their rifles before entering a tunnel. Jake, a Twilight Zone fan with a vivid imagination, once scoffed at these stories, thinking they were just squad mates passing time between battles. But after encountering those fiery red eyes in the tunnel, his certainty wavered. He couldn't forget the sensation of being watched, the realization that the darkness wasn't just an absence of light, but a living entity, breathing, waiting. Each time he crawled through narrow passages, hands probing for traps, he wondered, was something down here not human? Were the scrapes, the fleeting shadows, Viet Cong, or something that had dwelled underground long before the war began? The courage of tunnel rats like Jake, Tom, and Mike was undeniable. They entered the darkness with the resolve of soldiers forged in fire, driven by the belief that their squad waited above. But fear, an uninvited companion, always followed, whispering of nameless dangers. They were heroes, but also human, and underground, where the line between bravery and despair grew thin, they learned that sometimes the most terrifying enemy wasn't the one holding a gun, but the darkness swallowing them whole. When the last American helicopters lifted off from Vietnam's skies in 1973, following the Paris Peace Accords, they carried exhausted soldiers, shattered dreams, and a nation steeped in grief. The war, with all its brutality, officially ended 2 years later in 1975, when the South fell to the communist North. Over 3 million lives were lost, mostly civilians, farmers, women, and children caught in the crossfire of bombs and ideology. The dense jungles and rice paddies, once trembling under airstrikes, now lay silent, but the memories of those years echoed like a mournful ballad that never fades. The Viet Cong's tunnels, once impregnable underground fortresses, became historical relics, like those at Kut Chai, where tourists now squeeze through narrow passages, trying to grasp a fraction of the terror soldiers endured. But for men like Jake Miller, Mike Thompson, and Tom Reed, the tunnel rats who crawled through the darkness, those tunnels were not just history. They were living nightmares, clinging to their minds like relentless phantoms. Jake returned to Ohio, bearing scars on his body and wordless nightmares. In his hometown, amid quiet streets and neon-lit bars, he tried to blend into everyday life, sipping Budweiser and swapping football stories with friends. But when night fell, the fiery red eyes he'd seen in the tunnel reappeared, glinting like embers in the dark. He'd sit in a bar corner, gaze distant, recounting the story in a low voice, as if afraid the darkness might overhear. "I don't know what it was," he'd say, twirling his beer glass, "but I swear it wasn't human." His friends would laugh, dismissing it as the tale of a haunted veteran, but Jake's eyes, fractured with invisible cracks, told a different story. A story of an underworld where the line between reality and the supernatural grew fragile. The story of the Viet Cong tunnels is not just a chapter in history, but an epic of courage, sacrifice, and mysteries forever unanswered. The tunnel rats, like Jake, Mike, and Tom, ventured into the darkness with ironclad faith that their squad awaited above, that courage would triumph over fear. Yet they also brought back questions no one dared answer. Were the shadows flitting through the tunnels, the sharp scrapes and those glowing red eyes real, or mere products of exhausted minds tormented by oxygen deprivation, Agent Orange, and endless days facing death? No one knows for sure, and perhaps that ambiguity is what keeps these stories alive. A reminder that war doesn't just claim lives, but steals fragments of the souls of those who survive. When you walk through a silent forest, where rustling leaves blend with the wind, or hear an odd noise in the night, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is something watching from the darkness, lurking in places light cannot reach? And if you're brave enough, would you dare step in to find out, as the tunnel rats did, or would you turn away, leaving the mystery forever shrouded in silence? These questions have no answers, but they force us to look deep within, at the courage and fear entwined in our souls. We honor the soldiers, both American and Vietnamese, who fought and died in those jungles, rice paddies, and stifling tunnels. They were heroes, but also human, carrying dreams and pain from a chaotic era. Above all, we never forget the mysteries they left behind, stories told only by survivors, those who stared into the darkness and returned, but never truly escaped. The tunnels may now be relics, but their memories and what lurked within remain vivid. A warning that some things in this world, whether war or supernatural, will forever lie beyond our understanding.